Now let's get the latest on those 5 Taliban leaders who were traded for Bergdahl. They're now in Qatar, and ABC's chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross is on their trail with more on how they are living now and what happens next. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, George. It's been a week now since the 5 senior Taliban leaders arrived here for what is in effect a year-long all-expenses-paid vacation for them and their extended families in the midst of luxury in this tiny, prosperous Gulf Coast country. Government officials say the former detainees are free to travel wherever they like in Qatar, a country with the highest per capita income in the world and the 5-star hotels and other trappings of wealth and prosperity to prove it. Since their arrival to a hero's welcome 7 days ago, the 5 former detainees have been kept hidden from view by the Qatar government and told not to talk with any reporters. The Taliban operate here out of a villa in an upscale residential area, and as part of the deal, Qatar will provide the 5 men with their own well-protected villas where they'll be free to talk or meet with whomever they like. The Qatar government says it will closely monitor all of their communications and movements. And in a statement over the weekend, their first, the 5 men said they will comply with the agreement not to return to Afghanistan or the battlefield over the next year. But of course, they'll be free to do just that in only 51 weeks from now. George?
Okay, Brian, thanks. Lots of questions now for the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers. He joins us now. And Congressman, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's begin with those 5 Taliban leaders in Qatar right now. You've seen the intelligence on these 5 men. What's your sense of what they'll do after this year is up?
Well, and we're not even sure they'll wait a year. Their real value in the next 51 weeks is propaganda by the Taliban, and we've already seen that start. So they can meet with Taliban political leaders in Qatar. They can have family members travel to Qatar and back to Pakistan and Afghanistan. And we believe that's certainly an opportunity for a courier network to get them prepared for what's next. I don't think you'll see any operational activity right now by them. They're smart enough to know better. But it allows them to prepare for what's next. And that's going to be join the fight against what Americans are left in Afghanistan in 51 weeks.
You're convinced of that?
I am convinced, absolutely convinced of that. We've already seen both in their rhetoric and their actions, and certainly the information that we see coming out of the Taliban, including the Haqqani network in Pakistan, would suggest that's absolutely going to happen. Maybe not all 5, but I do believe 3 for sure, likely 4, and that 5th one is on the fence, but I will probably play some role in active operations.
But is there anything we can do to prevent that?
Well, unfortunately, the deal is done, and that's what is the problem here. And I think here's one thing about this, George. The focus has all been, is one soldier worth it, not worth it? I think that completely misses the problem here. This is a huge regional and geopolitical problem for the United States moving forward. Hostages are now currency in this war on terror. That's always dangerous for both diplomats, aid workers, soldiers in the battlefield. But secondly, think about what happened in the last week. America said, we're leaving in 2016 completely. We negotiated with the terrorist Haqqani network. Oh, and by the way, this happened before the election even occurred. This weekend, the Taliban tried to assassinate one of the political leaders, Abdullah, who's running for office in Afghanistan. This was the wrong message at the wrong time, and we are going to pay for this decision for years. Again, this shouldn't be about did Congress get invited to the party. This is all about this honest discussion about what the ramifications of this are.
So you're very clear. You've been very clear. You said you would not have made the trade. But what about that bedrock principle of the soldier's creed, I will never leave a fallen comrade?
Well, but the problem, George, is that this hostilities haven't stopped. Normally, that's if the hostilities have stopped. There are other options. And this was what's so angered for those of us who have followed this for years. This was not the only option that was available.
The administration says it was.
No, well, the administration has this theory that you're either with them or you're for thermonuclear war, and there's nothing in between. That's just wrong. And so the reason they avoided Congress, this isn't about we didn't get invited to the party, so we should have our feelings hurt, is because we can empower all of the people, diplomats who disagreed with this decision, intelligence folks who disagreed with the decision, military folks. That voice never got heard in the final discussions leading up to this deal. That's why you engage with Congress. We can empower those voices. We can get those questions asked so you don't make a mistake that actually might jeopardize diplomats, aid workers, and soldiers as we move forward. And that's what my fear is as we move forward.
If Bowe Bergdahl had been captured during a battle, would you still be opposed to this deal?
Yes, I would, because we haven't used all the options that are afforded to us. Remember, he was in Pakistan, not all that far, we believe, from an ISI and their intelligence service and military outpost. So now there's two other, an American and her husband's Canadian, we believe is in Pakistan. Bergdahl was in Pakistan, certainly Osama bin Laden, Pakistan. You get a reoccurring theme here. In the FBI, George, we would call that a clue. This is a problem and a place to start. We never went at Pakistan with any level of pressure to say, you're going to have to help us solve this problem. None of that happened. There were other options on the table, many still classified, that never even rose to the level of discussion. I think that's the problem. Remember, it's not just getting the soldier out, and we're glad and happy for the family. That's great. But it's a bigger ramification of what this trade means to Afghans that we've asked to risk their lives trying to free that country of the Taliban, including women.
Excuse me. What should happen with Bergdahl now? If he's been found to have deserted, should he be punished, or has he already paid the price?
Well, I think that the Department of Defense needs to do a very thorough investigation. Obviously, those soldiers are very, very concerned and upset by it, and if their account is true, they should be. You jeopardize other soldiers when you walk away from your post, period, and end of story. And that's a serious, serious matter in a combat zone. But it needs to be thoroughly investigated by Department of Defense. The administration trying to change the narrative through these anonymous or leaks to the paper about what the deal was and wasn't, none of which I found credible, by the way. It needs to stop. They just should stop all of that. We ought to have a full discussion right now about the policy implications, broader implications that have just occurred.
Final question. Lindsey Graham has raised the prospect of impeachment if President Obama releases more Guantanamo prisoners without approval from Congress. Should impeachment be on the table?
Well, again, that's a long way down this road. And the most disturbing part about this, George, is that in 2011, their answers to the questions about for a bipartisan opposition to this trade, by the way, was a whole series of things that had to happen. And one of them struck me, and it was really by the Secretary of State at that time, Hillary Clinton, said that if all of our conditions aren't met, then none of them will be met. And it was conditions like renouncing violence, adhering to the Afghan Constitution, and making sure that women are treated fairly in Afghanistan. We got none of that. I think that's where we ought to focus right now. We have made a serious, serious geopolitical mistake. We've empowered the Taliban. The one thing that they wanted more than anything, George, was recognition from the U.S. government so they can use that to propagandize against areas that are unsecure still in Afghanistan. They got all of that. So that's where we need to focus. We need to unwind this thing and try to fix it before we start, I think, hanging scalps on a pole. This is as serious as I've seen it, and we need to work through these issues. I encourage the administration to come back to Congress as the law requires so you can have these discussions, so you can get these questions answered before you move forward.
Congressman, thanks very much for your time this morning.